reason.
Mm-hmm. All right. Skype's recording on Audacity.
All right. Well, welcome everyone to another first episode of another miniseries called The Spinsters Get Current. So this was an idea that Kelly and I had coming into the new year because we realized that we have a tendency to be very behind when it comes to new releases for movies. I know for myself, I tend to like to go for comfort films a lot and like to rewatch a lot of items that I enjoy. And I also have like so many years of horror that I need to catch up on with, like old and new. So this is kind of like,
That's
yeah,
true.
and yeah, very true, very true. And Kelly, you know, being a 25-year veteran of the horror world, has seen quite a bit.
Yes.
But we both tend to be really bad at keeping up with new releases. So this is our attempt to do that.
Yes, I will say for myself, that's absolutely accurate. On New Year's Day, every year, I try to go back and watch stuff from the previous year to get caught up on films that I was super interested in, and that I actually can find here in Canada, which is usually the biggest aspect of that hinders our, ability to watch new films. So unless it comes out on Netflix or Shudder or something that you could rent on YouTube or whatever, often it's kind of just hard for us to get new movies, which is one of the reasons why we actually chose the one we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, so we often get people who ask us kind of our opinions about some of the most recent movies that have come out, but like we said, we're usually behind, or like Kelly and I are usually waiting for like certain type of movies that we really want to see, and we've done that, and we've been pleasantly surprised. I will say that about like Suspiria 2018, and then also Burned with The Craft Legacy in 2020, which actually introduced us into doing this idea, because I remember when Kelly and I did see The Craft together, we had so much to talk about and we really disputed on Twitter. But now we're like, okay, we're going to do like a little mini series. So we want to warn everyone, spoilers ahead, because we are going to talk about this film. We're going to talk about all kinds of different aspects of the film. And the film that we chose for this month is The Dark and the Wicked from 2020, which is available on Shudder.
Trailer. Or unedited video. Enjoy, folks. So because this is a new film, we decided that we would give you plot synopses for this miniseries and for these new films. So Louise and Michael are distant siblings who are brought back to the family farm in Texas when their father's illness, which keeps him bedridden and uncommunicative, cared for by his wife and a nurse, worsens. Their mother seems disturbed and expresses a desire for the children to leave. At night, she hangs herself in the barn after cutting off her own fingers in the kitchen. As time goes on, Louise and Michael start to understand what happened to their mother. The nurse confides in them that she heard her whispering to the father, but it seemed as if she was speaking not to him, but some other presence. Michael finds their mother's diary, which describes her fears of an unnamed presence trying to take the soul of her husband. The presence makes itself known to the siblings in increasingly terrifying and deadly ways, ultimately pushing Michael to suicide after he flees the house without Louise. Louise, traumatized by repeated interactions with a demonic presence, or entity, including the suicide of the nurse, remains with her father at the farm. As he dies, he is possessed by the presence, which in turn attacks Louise shortly after. Ooh,
Very spooky, like very ominous, right? Even like the title, like the, I guess you would say like the poster art for this movie makes it seem like it's going to be like really scary possession film, kind of like along the same veins of like The Taking of Deborah Logan.
Perhaps,
you know, right, of that kind of like that kind of genre, that kind of vein of I want to say like geriatric horror. I mean, this sounds like terrible to say it that way, but
no,
elder horror.
Yeah, exactly. I think maybe let's start with likes and dislikes, and then we can get into your fun film facts.
Oh, it sounds like okay. Likes and dislikes of this film. Like, okay, so I'm not sure about this film, and I'm obviously this is one of the reasons why I like to have discussions with people about newer releases, because sometimes I walk away feeling like, yes, I really love that movie, and other times I'm like, I'm not 100% how I feel about this, and other times I'm just like, I don't like this movie at all. This movie, I'm at a like, I don't know how I feel about this movie. On
Right.
one hand, I really like it and its attempts to kind of be the vein of folk horror with an isolated family, weird things happening around a farm, an unknown presence or entity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I tend to like films that have atmosphere and have like a really good, like slow burn.
Yeah.
But for
You also like
me,
supernatural films.
I also like supernatural films. However, I found for this film the two elements that I really liked also tended to really bother me. I felt
Oh.
the burn was too slow and not much payoff in the end. But even
Yeah.
then, I didn't like that everything was already hinting towards this demonic presence. There was like too much in the beginning for me to be like, I don't
Right.
know where this is. I know exactly where this is going.
Right.
And that's so I'm kind of like in this in between stage with this movie. I don't love it
Right.
and I don't hate it. How about yourself?
Gotcha. Right. You didn't have like a immediate visceral response to this
Yeah.
film. You're in that
Yeah.
gray zone or not really
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
For me, I didn't care for it.
Okay.
I really
Yeah.
didn't. I was super disappointed, but I really didn't care for this film. Didn't hate it, didn't love it, didn't really like it. I just don't have overall much to say. Maybe some points of things I like. The acting was pretty fantastic. I mean, it
Yeah.
was shot well. Like, it's not like it's a quote bad movie. It just didn't work for me in any way, shape, and form. So I'll say
Well,
that.
Especially too because I was actually excited when I found out that it was Brian Bartino who wrote and directed this film, and
Yeah,
he was the writer and
absolutely.
director for The Strangers in 2008,
Yep.
and I love The
Yep.
Strangers.
Yep.
I remember,
love The Strangers.
yeah.
Yes. Yes. I
So when
know. So that's why I
I
was super disappointed.
exactly yeah, so that's what because I remember when I saw The Strangers, I remember like after seeing that movie, I was like, yes, this is the reaction. I love this movie, and usually I know when I really like a movie when I have ideas of things I want to write about. I
Right.
do have some ideas, but they
Oh.
came a lot later
Mm.
and on thinking about the movie. But it wasn't like an immediate reaction right away. And I feel like it's kind of one of those films that I can go either way depending on people's arguments and kind of
Right.
how I feel about it. But yeah, once again, I was hoping for something a little bit more from
Yeah.
Brian.
Yeah. And you haven't seen The Strangers Pray at Night, right? The sequel?
I have not because I've
Mm.
heard it hasn't been I heard people didn't receive it very well. So I'm not
Mm.
too sure if like where I want to go with that. Also, I don't know, I feel like I really just enjoyed The Strangers as a film in itself. I don't know if I
Right.
really like sequels of home invasion films.
Right. Well, I personally recommend it because I
Okay.
personally quite liked it. It's got a different
Okay.
vibe
Okay.
to it, a different feel, but I really enjoyed it. The pool scene, which is I know a lot of people talk about it because the
Okay.
pool scene's fucking epic and it's awesome. So it's
Okay.
also still very well made. I love The Strangers, one of my favorite films that came out in the 2000s. Absolutely. It's subtle and surprising and dramatic and incredibly well done. So,
Hmm.
yeah,
Hmm.
that's the main reason I was very disappointed. And I'm very disappointed in you, Brian. It's all right, though. It's all right. You have
Yeah.
time to redeem yourself.
Well, it was really interesting because this film it premiered in the Fantasia International. Oh, I can't say this right. Everyone's gonna see me pronounce it so many wrongs on the video, but premiered at the Fantasia International Film Festival in August of 2020, which I thought was really interesting because that was just in the beginning, like early stages of the pandemic in 2020, when the first wave of isolations were just kind of ending and kind of starting up, and second wave's kind of starting up again. You're getting people who are doing all the virtual festivals, and I thought, well, this is really interesting that that people really feel drawn to this film because it has high reviews. It has like a 92% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes with a 7.4 out of 10, and it's favorably received by critics, and I'm wondering if it's people were connecting to it because of the way it really displays this isolation and how that can
Right.
make people feel like because I started thinking about the mother. Okay, yeah. So those are just that. Yeah, that's just like a random thought I was having about how like maybe one of the reasons why this film was so positively received in the beginning because it was coming out during a time in the very early of the pandemic and people were really feeling the impacts of social isolation and how that
Mm-hmm.
feels and how
Mm-hmm.
draining it is and how emotional it is and people were able to
Mm-hmm.
relate to it now. Whereas like now where I'm like we're kind of moving. We've done this like 3 or 4 times around now these lockdowns and we've just kind of gotten
Yeah.
used to it, so it's like not having the isolation aspect of this film didn't have the same impact on me. as maybe it would have earlier.
Right. So you're saying that you think that maybe people would have responded to it differently if it came out like 5 years from now or like a couple of years ago. You think people wouldn't have perhaps liked it as much? Because people love this film. When I posted on our social media that we were going to be covering this film, everybody is cheering. People love this movie. I personally don't understand why. I mean, but this will prompt us to have online discussions with people. So, folks, why do you love this movie? Do you? Do you not? Let us know.
Yeah. No, and for sure, and that's maybe why people like felt like drawn to the in the beginning, and you know, because I could understand like it was kind of like watching the film Host, right? When we all saw Host come out, and we're like, oh my god, this movie is so amazing. It's because we were all like, we know exactly what this feels like. These Zoom calls and like the digital stuff, and like right, we're all really relating to those in those moments. Yeah, and like the reason why like kind of going back to this idea of kind of like a elder horror, I feel like this is a film that can slot itself in that category of horror because you see the elements of you know, an older couple living alone on a farm. You know, the mother is taking care of her husband and they're older, and then like their children are coming in to help them, and you know, and it reminds me of that vein of like, you know, the Taking of Deborah Logan, because we still get that possession angle to it. Sorry if I spoiled Deborah Logan for anyone who hasn't seen it yet. You get that possession element of it, but then also I reminded me of the film when I actually first started watching this film. It actually reminded me of the film Relic, which is on Netflix, and I watched that a couple weeks ago, and I loved that movie, and I thought that was a great movie. I was genuinely intrigued by what was happening with all the women in this home, and especially an older woman, and how she's experiencing like forms of kind of like dementia, and just how the family is undergoing change and aging and everything. I was like, okay, I really like that.
Right.
Element. And I felt like Relic did that really well, but The Dark and the Wicked didn't capture that for me.
Fair enough. Yeah. I haven't seen The Relic. Is it just Relic or The Relic? Relic is definitely from the 90s. So there we go. Relic.
Relic. Yeah.
I haven't seen it, so I have no comment on that. But that's interesting that it shares some, I guess, DNA, we'll call it, with that film, but the other one does it better. Your note about like the older woman, like they're probably in their 60s, maybe. Yeah. They could be mid to late, actually, like pending, you know, I guess where they're at. But, you know, farm life is hard, you know, and they look like they've been doing it all on their own. You know, there's that person that has the neighboring farm that comes over and helps them sometimes. But other than that, they've been doing it all on their own, because we find out they have kind of like estranged children, especially the daughter, Louise, and so they've been doing it all on their own. So they could be older. But that was an interesting note, is her seeing things and potentially talking to things. Is like, is that actually dementia? Is there actually something supernatural going on? Or is it manifestations of the isolation exasperated by her grief? Because she's already grieving. She's already having a hard time because her husband, her life partner of probably like 40 to 50 years is dying in their home. And so, you know, or the other thing that kind of popped into my mind was like, or are these hallucinations conjured up by our creepy priest? So who knows? You know, that was kind of a thing, like, with shit going on, it was actually real. Is it supernatural? I know we start seeing supernatural things with the kids, but for the mother, that's kind of what, you know, came to my mind.
Yeah. Oh, and that was kind of something that like also kind of threw me off, was this introduction of a priest that really reminded me of Poltergeist 2, and I was like, oh, what is happening? Is this a callback to Poltergeist 2? Okay, cool, because that priest in Poltergeist 2 is really creepy. Never want that man at my door. But to have like the priest image kind of showing up there, and then the comments of like the mother having all those crosses in her pocket. She's singing a gospel hymn. And I was like wondering, I'm like, okay, so where is this religious angle coming into it? Because we get it, the family, the kids, like they even say we're not Christians, like we don't believe in this. So that kind of threw me off a bit. I was like, what? And a part of me just felt like it was one of those things that we tend to do in American films, is when possession is involved, we need to throw religion in there, because it makes it creepier. It makes it more unsettling for us if we see, you know, images of Christ versus the devil, and it's like this battle between good and evil and the soul.
Yes,
so, yeah.
Add in that creep factor, and I love that insight, because it's not really well fleshed out. It's like, why did this creepy priest, I'm calling him creepy because he is creepy, and then priests and nuns are creepy to me. Why do they target this family? Why this point in time? What is this all about? Also, I just now have a hard time believing that the devil is the bad guy. That's just going to be forever my thoughts and feelings in satanic feminism. I'm kind of over it. Devil's not a bad guy. But it's not super fleshed out, so I didn't really like that. I would have preferred if it was more of like very even more ambiguous, because the thing that I really disliked about this film is, you kind of brought it up in what you liked and disliked, is like out of the gate they're like, boom, there's weird shit going on, here's this creepy thing that they see in the barn. It's not subtle. It's not subtle whatsoever. And anytime that I'm going to watch a supernatural or a paranormal movie, which I don't usually watch, I want it to be subtle. I want it like the Innkeepers, you know, stuff like that. Things that just take more time. They build the tension, build the kind of suspense. Like, I feel like the only scary part or unsettling part, and if they went this route with it, was if it was the scene where the daughter is in, like, sleeping with her dad, and she's sleeping, and she hears that something come into the room and crawl up on the bed, and she knows something is on top of her father. It's like, oh shit, this is real, or isn't, because then she wakes up. So who knows if that's actually real or not. But that was pretty terrifying. So if they would have kept it to like a minimalistic tone, I would have liked this a hell of a lot more. But it's just like boom, boom, so much stuff going on. The mom floating in the sky and all these things. Keep it simple. Just have the mom singing in another room, and that's all you hear. You know what I mean? Like, it was so not subtle that made me really dislike it.
Yeah, 100%. Because there was two scenes very in the beginning where I was like, oh, okay, there really is an evil entity, which is in the beginning with like the sheep among the sheep, and we see the figure in the sheep, and then we see, and I knew it was going to happen. I saw it happening where the daughter gets up, walks from her chair, she walks by the door of her parents' room, you see a dark figure, she goes to the door, she comes back, her mother's there, and I'm like, I knew that was going to happen. I was like, and here it is. I'm like, if those two elements were taken from that and just continued on with just the chair moving, her singing in weird areas, her just staring off, I was like, that's creepy. Like when she's barely talking to her children, I was like, that is really just upsetting, because I'm like, I don't like that. To me as an individual, just is upsetting because you can't seem to reach someone to talk to them. And then and then we see her like chopping her fingers. Like, oh, that scene. I was like, I don't like that scene at all. And she just kept going. I was like, please stop. And then her death, which was really tragic to see herself hanging that way. But like those are moments that creep me out. So it's like I wasn't saying it's like it was like there was like this blend of like some really good moments, and I'm like, ooh, and then there were other times I'm just like, I saw that coming, and that's kind of disappointing.
And there's just there's just so much all the time. And and I just that scene, if you walk past a hallway that has an open door at the end, classic horror trope. We've seen all this all the time. But one walk by and a potential like, oh, did I actually see that? And then she walks by again. You did see that. That is correct. I'm like, okay, this is just like
it's very on the nose.
Yes, just ham-fisted, just like forcing all these tropes into me, and I'm just not here for it. I just didn't really, I didn't like it. I didn't like that at all.
And so another idea I had about this film. So when I started to kind of like sit and ponder the film a bit more and being like, okay, what are the other elements? Maybe if I stepped back and pulled myself away from like the overt supernatural elements of it, what else of it? Okay, what are other elements that we see in this kind of elder horror? And one of the things I saw that was really interesting was a film about caretakers and who takes care of them. And that kind of struck a chord with me, because I started thinking about like, here's this woman who is isolated alone on her farm, taking care of her dying husband on her own. That can have a very hefty mental and emotional toll on someone. And like you said, her husband of maybe plus 50 years, she's watching literally die in her
Yeah.
home, and she has to come to some sort of terms with that. And then you get the nurse character who is also a caretaker, and she talks that she has a scene, a really important scene that I thought was really nice, touched the film, where she talks about, you know, being with dying patients and making sure they're not alone, and how much of an emotional, and I was thinking about like how much it would be an emotional burden for her as she grows attached to the family, because she could see how the family, like the moment her mother was changing, the things are happening with the children, and you could see the look on her face, and she's like, this is a hard process, and she has to see families go through this. So I started thinking about her. I'm like, who takes care of her? Like, how does she take care of herself? And then the children, right? Louise and Michael, they're estranged from their parents. And I thought it was interesting because they really represent that kind of family style, like that rural family style of the families aren't very close. Like they're close, but it's all about work. And we see this often with Michael. He's always out taking care of things on the farm, and Louise is taking care of things else. But like that is a constant thing that happens often in rural communities, in rural, especially rural families. They spend like 6 hours in the morning taking care of the farm, 6 hours at night. They go to school, you know, they don't have a lot of connection. And you can tell that it's happened between the kids and the mother and stuff like that, but they still show a great deal of love them. But then here's this reverse role of now Louise and Michael have to come in and take care of their parents. And Michael is struggling because he has his own family. He needs to take care of his family. So ultimately, when he leaves Louise at the end to go back to his family, she's like, oh my God, you left me. Like, I only have you. And he's like, well, I've got to take care of my own family. So it's like this. I when I kind of step back from the supernatural elements of the film, like, okay, so this has an interesting idea of, you know, caretakers and the emotional and mental toll it can have on people to take care of other people who are sick and isolated and feeling alone. And and I think that would have been a really interesting element of the film that is highlighted. But if it wasn't, I don't want to say like overtaxed with all the supernatural elements to it. Like I
absolutely was overshadowed by all that. That would have been a way better movie if they made if they brought back, they reeled in that all the wacky supernatural stuff that's happening literally constantly within 10 minutes of the movie. I would have felt more for these characters. I could have got more involved into this family and everything. And, you know, there's a bunch of discourse and conversations happening right now about Hereditary and Midsommar and the piece that I wrote. But let's talk about a movie that tackled grief and how to deal with that. This movie, again, could have been so much stronger if they just made all of those supernatural elements way more subtle, because then we would have more moments of levity with the family. And yes, that really wonderful moment with the nurse, you know, talking about how she sees people die all the time, and she sees the inner workings of all these families and how this all affects them and how it affects her. But you know, it's easy to forget that even happened because there's so much of this, like, just like throwing all this like ghosty stuff at you that it really takes away the power of that underlying theme that you're talking about, like caretakers and isolation and grief. Because you're right, I think it would be a very unique film because we don't often get those rural, like farm country kind of isolated horror. There's stuff like We Are What We Are that I really like and I've written about before as a monthly pick for cannibalism. But, you know, I think that would have been, again, a much better film if he dealt more with that, like elevate that and less of the spooky stuff. Because you throw way too much spooky stuff, you're no longer a spooky movie. And now I don't care about your story and I don't care about your characters. But like, it was deeply emotional. There's a lot of really intense, well, I guess there was one really intense thing that happened, which is their mother hanging herself. And of course, Louise was like, this isn't right. But Michael's like, man, she hung herself. And they're like, no, nobody's listening to her again. Nobody's listening to Louise. Nobody's listening to the woman. But it could have been just a much more empathetic film.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't I don't dislike this film and I don't love this film. I'm in an okay place with it. I accept for what this film does and I see its merits in this film and what it attempted to do. But I'm on the same agreement that as much as I love atmosphere, as much as I love spooky stuff, give it all to me. I sometimes need to have a balance, and depending on the film I'm going in, I went into this film seeing one thing and seeing another thing, and it just, to me, did not blend very well. So yeah, that's how I feel about The Dark and Wicked. Would I recommend it? I would recommend other films before this one. If anyone wants to talk about elder horror and things like that, I would definitely recommend Relic on Netflix right now. Also, The Taking of Deborah Logan is another great film. But I also think that it does have me interested and curious to look at more films about caretakers and what they go through and experiencing what and I think there's quite a few different horror films out there. I want to do a little more research on this, but I think it's a really interesting topic because I've seen how it can have a huge emotional burden and impact. Not burden, sorry, that's the wrong word. I want to say it. It can take an emotional, mental toll on people.
Right. I wouldn't shy away from using the word burden. I am in a caretaker role for species that cannot actually talk to me, so it's heavy. It is a heavy burden that you can't really share with anybody else. And that's kind of that caretaker role. You can talk about it, but you cannot share it.
Yeah. Exactly.
So would I recommend The Dark and the Wicked? No. Throw in The Strangers or The Strangers Pray at Night instead. Yeah, that's my final thoughts on that.
There we go. So yeah, there's a quick first mini episode on our thoughts on The Dark and Wicked from 2020.
Absolutely. And if you have recommendations of newer releases that hopefully we can find here in Canada, within means and not illegal means, then please let us know. We look forward to doing more of these in the future because there's tons of movies that keep coming out. And so we'll try our best to stay on top of things and remain current. But until then, bye.
Bye.